Matters and privilege and recognition of guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning and welcome back to all of our colleagues in here for another day of debate in the Legislative Assembly. And hi to all those who are watching online. And a special thank you, Mr. Speaker, to all of those in the media who help bring the events, the important events that take place here and share them with Islanders and others, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin my greetings this morning by wishing well to the 4 teams who are participating in what they're calling the COVID Cup, Mr. Speaker. It's a series of games between 4 Island hockey teams, the Kensington Wild, the Charlottetown Knights, and 2 teams from the Mount Academy who are taking place here, trying to make the best of a difficult situation and playing some games in Kensington, Montague, and in Charlottetown. So best of luck as that COVID Cup series continues this weekend. I also wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, a special hello and thank you to to Marshall Harrington and the crew at the City Cinema who are back in full swing for December, Mr. Speaker. There have been a few setbacks on the agenda, of course, but they've been resourceful and they've scrambled quickly. They have a pretty solid slate of movies scheduled, and there's new protocols in place, of course, and there's a few changes there, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the best movie popcorn in the world will be on for sale at the cinema. So I just want to thank Marshall and all of those who bring the magic of movies and the togetherness of community together in that lovely facility, Mr. Speaker, and encourage all Islanders to go out and support it. I also want to say a special thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the provincial government employees. I've often said since I've taken this job that I believe it's the employees of government who are actually the government of Prince Edward Island. It's a privilege for all of us to represent them in this capacity, but they're the ones who do the work and serve Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and their United Way campaign this year set a goal of $135,000 to raise for the United Way. There was a lot of difficulty and challenge and changes to how they went about the campaign, but I'm pleased to report today that they met and exceeded that goal, having raised $145,756.51, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, lovely. I just want to say a special thank you to the co-chairs of this year's campaign, Brad Caldwell and David Keedwell, and also all of those departmental coordinators and liaisons who actually made this happen. It's money that will go to much needed cause, and I'm happy to be able to report that good news today, Mr. Speaker. And just finally, before I sit down, Mr. Speaker, Sunday is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. As we all have talked about in here for a couple of days, on December 6th in 1989, 14 women were murdered and 10 were injured at the École Polytechnique in Montreal simply because they were women, Mr. Speaker. The day is to remember those who were murdered that day and had their futures cut short. And Mr. Speaker, it also stands for us to need to promote greater awareness and action for change against violence that occurs for women in this country and all over the world, Mr. Speaker. I know the minister responsible for the status of women, as has been the standard in this legislature, will do a presentation after question period, Mr. Speaker, recognizing this in greater detail. But I just wanted to mention in this opening that it's important that we remember. It's been 31 years since the tragedy. We have to continue to share that with our children, Mr. Speaker, and let them understand what happened and why. We need to continue to mourn those who we lost, and we need to continue to pledge to act to eliminate violence against women, Mr. Speaker. And if we can do that in here, that would be the proudest day for all of us. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I wish all of our members a productive day.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd first like to thank the Premier particularly for the end of his statement there, and I want to echo your remarks on the remembering that awful day at the École Polytechnique and doing everything we can to move our society to a very different place. Thank you, Premier. I want to start out by congratulating Dr. Rosemary Henderson, who's a constituent of mine in District 17. She lives in St. Catharines, and she just received an award from the Canadian Medical Association last night. That award is presented to a physician who has distinguished themselves by their achievements in medicine or science or the humanities, and Dr. Henderson has certainly done that. She's been a pathologist at the QEH now for oh my gosh, 20-something years, I think, and she served several terms as the medical director there. So congratulations to Rosemary. Also, congratulations to Patsy Dingwall, who just launched a book about her experience traveling to Kenya with a group of farmers helping farmers. She went there as, I think, an unqualified teacher at the time, and she did her to complete her international teaching practicum in Kenya. And she was sponsored by Farmers Helping Farmers. She went over with a whole bunch of things, and as she said, she was distributing the gifts and the crayons and things to her students, and then she realized that she was the one who had most to learn, and she's written this beautiful book. So I would encourage people to look out for that. You can get more information on the book and ways to donate to Farmers Helping Farmers through their Christmas campaign on their website. And finally, Mr. Speaker, congratulations also to the Black Cultural Society, who last Friday held a very successful town hall meeting at the Confederation Centre, and they've just launched their own new website. So congratulations to them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to make reference to the Premier's comments about the importance of remembrance for the disaster at École Polytech 31 years ago. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we heard the Premier announce that we will remain outside the Atlantic bubble until December 21st. As we all know, this is a difficult decision and disappointing to many who return for the holidays, but a necessary move to ensure our schools, businesses, and recreational activities can continue. I support Dr. Morrison and the Premier in taking this proactive measure. Also, Mr. Speaker, I was also pleased to see a great initiative being coordinated by food banks across the province to provide masks to low-income islanders. We are all in this pandemic together, and we should all have access to necessary masks regardless of one's financial situation. I thank everyone who worked to get this initiative off the ground. Great work, everyone. Also, I'd like to take a moment to bring attention to an event that will be happening in my district in the rural municipality of St. Nicholas at their hall. On Sunday, December 6th from 10 to 4, they will be having their annual Christmas fair. This is a great opportunity to get a start on Christmas shopping while supporting local. And of course, they will follow all the COVID guidelines, and I encourage everyone to check out this fair this weekend. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and hello to everybody, Mermaid Stratford, and I'm honoured to just take a moment to also express my thoughts about December 6th last year when I attended the gathering to remember those that were murdered. Dawn Wilson spoke, and I can honestly tell you that that is a speech that has stuck with me, and I remember that, and I remember her calls to action. And I know with the presentation of the the Poverty Committee report for basic income, we made great strides in one of her calls to action, but there are two others that we really need to ensure that we move on. And it just, it's not often that you hear a speech from somebody that you carry it with you every day, and I do hope that if you haven't had a chance to hear that or read that we do, because it's so important that we carry on from those words that Dawn left us with that day. The other thing that I'd like to recognize is the Stratford Nary Lions Club in my district. They are closing their 45th charter year, and I have had the great honor since I've been elected to witness some of the great things that they do in our community. So much so that I have asked if somebody would sponsor me to become a member of that organization, and which will be happening on December 7th. So I'm really looking forward to that. That happens on Monday. And I guess one of my prouder moments of it all is my dad was an original charter member of that club, and there's a picture on the wall in the Lion's Den of all the charter members. And when I went through that list, I recognized so many people in my community who were the people that were always around, whether it be at the rink, whether it be, doing scouts, but they were the volunteers that you always recognized when you were growing up. And there's not many of the charter members that are still member, but Leighton Doherty is. He's the last charter member that's still a member. So 45 years he's been a member of that club. And I just would like to recognize everything that they do every day, because they're really there for their district, for their community. And their motto is "We serve," and they absolutely do that every single day. So thank you to the Lions Club of Stratford.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I usually don't get up and wish people happy birthdays because I'm always afraid I'm going to miss one. But today is Neil McPhail's birthday, and Neil was a next-door neighbor of mine for many years. We recently had some major challenges, and actually, yesterday was World Disability Day, and I did say in my statement that we're only one accident or illness away. And so it popped up on my Facebook. It's Neil's birthday today, and just recently Neil had both legs amputated. Ooh. And so I went to see him, and I'm telling you, if we all had his attitude and outlook on life, our big problems would become pretty small pretty quick. Thank you.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hello to all the voters in District 22. I feel I rise too often to talk about violence here in this this legislature, but it's a topic that just seems to just keep coming up and coming up. But at least today, I get to rise on a point of pride. I fully acknowledge the National Day of Remembrance of Action on Violence Against Women. Sorry. But today, it's a source of pride for me because I was invited to go to an event today in Leah Rose at the memorial in Heather Morris Park, and I couldn't make it because I'd be here, Mr. Speaker. So I asked them if I could send someone in my place, and they said sure. And who's replacing me are my two young boys, age 10 and 11. So it just means so much to me. I had to rise and acknowledge them.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, so yesterday the Medical Society PEI held their annual general meeting, albeit virtually, and I just wanted to stand today to congratulate Dr. Trina Stewart for putting her name forward and being elected as the new president of the Medical Society PEI, and of course a huge thank you to Dr. David Bannon for his leadership over the last year plus. Normally the AGM would have taken place a little bit earlier, but due to COVID, it was delayed. And just like the leader of the official opposition, I'd also like to congratulate Dr. Rosemary Henderson for her award that she received from the Canadian Medical Association. I've known Rosemary for quite some time and had the privilege to sit on the board of the Canadian Cancer Society PEI division with her for many years, so just well deserved. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Did I miss anyone? The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to, it's a pleasure to rise, of course, and I want to commend the government for extending the bubble ban for another 2 weeks, and I think it's a very, very responsible thing to do, and if they have to extend it even further, it will be devastating to islanders, but I'm sure they'll understand, and I'm sure it'll be necessary. But I know the Chief Health Officer has already been in touch with the Santa Claus and the elves, and I was wondering if she could sit down and maybe devise a special scheme for getting family to the island for Christmas, using similar approaches that the government is already using for essential workers coming in with extra testing and other things. Just a suggestion. Please ask Santa. Thank you.
No one else? Member statements, and for our first member statement, I'll call on the honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot, and the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague mentioned earlier, today at noon, the East Prince Women Information Centre will be holding a candle lighting ceremony to remember the women who lost their lives in the Montreal massacre, and also to remember the island women who have been lost due to gender violence. This ceremony will be different in past years due to COVID, but my colleagues from Summerside and I will have representatives there to place a rose at the memorial on our behalf because the House is sitting today. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the island organizations that are on the ground every day fighting for women's full participation in society, and in particular to highlight the work of East Prince Women's Information Centre. EPWIC opened November 10, 1984, when a group of women from Summerside established a centre with the priority of addressing the unmet needs of women in East Prince. The centre endeavours to support women and support changes in the status of women, to promote gender equality and encourage full and equal participation in the social, political, legal, health, and economic sphere of everyday community life. They offer so many programs and services to women and girls and fill a much-needed gap in our community. So today, as we remember the women who lost their lives due to gender violence, let us also honor those in our community who are doing the real, actual work of improving the status of women on PEI. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbanks, the third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I woke up this morning and I said I almost forgot my Christmas wish list, so I thought I'd read it in the House. I know Dr. Morrison assured us Santa had pre-travel approval, but I just want to make sure that they get my list. So, dear Santa, this year I'm wishing for a mental health campus, mobile mental health crisis teams, increased access to addiction services, support for family members of those suffering with mental health and addictions, strategy for economic recovery for all industries, additional supports for early year learning centres, reduction in class size for island students, Elliott River School in West Rowley expansion and renovations, more transparency, long-term care beds, George Cole bursary, diabetes pumps for all islanders, shingles vaccines for seniors, plan for distribution for COVID-19 vaccine, affordable housing units, review of work environment for nurses, full complement of nurses, doctor for every islander, full review and transparency of all COVID spending, and the Minister of Transportation to pave the remainder of all island roads.
The honourable member from Morel, Donagh, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the member from Cornwall Meadowbank forgot that his party worked in the toy factory since 2007. Could have been a lot of things built over the past 13 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will come a day when this pandemic is no more. We don't know when that day will be, but we do know that work is going on around the clock to develop treatments and vaccines all around the world. When we do reach that day, we will have to work to restore our economy, recover, and rebuild. This will take effort from all sectors of our economy and society. One vital sector that will be the key to our economic recovery will always be our early learning sector, and I want to take a moment to pay tribute to the workers in this sector. One thing that this pandemic has shown us is how much our other economic sectors depend on a thriving early childhood sector. These child care centres are located across the island and enable parents to participate in the workforce, earn a living, and support their families. The workers in this sector are caring, hardworking, and extremely dedicated to the well-being of our children. We have just seen how essential these workers are to helping parents get back to work. Our operators have juggled incredible challenges during this pandemic and have been resilient, adjusting to public health guidelines and other precautions. We have seen wage increases to this sector, enhanced supports, and we need to keep that going, Mr. Speaker. The people that work in the sector and in the early childhood deserve our thanks and our support. On behalf of the House, I want to recognize the tremendous work done by our early childhood workers and thank them for all that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period, starting with response to questions taken as notice. No? For our first question, I'll ask the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Our province's agreement with the federal government on carbon pricing is set to expire at the end of March next year. Negotiations that we know have been going on for about a year now. We haven't heard anything from this government about how those discussions are going, so it seems they haven't yet been able to come to an agreement with the federal government. A question to the Premier. Why haven't you been able to conclude negotiations on a new carbon pricing agreement for the province?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Leader for the question. As he indicated in the preamble to the question, we have been aware of the fact that the current agreement will run out at the end of this fiscal year, and we've been working on the officials level to get toward a new agreement. That work continues on a daily basis. When we are get to a point where we can begin to share where we are at, Mr. Speaker, and both sides are comfortable with that, I'll be very happy to share that with Islanders. It's work that is just continues to take place. And as I think we all can appreciate, these are comprehensive discussions that take place at this level. And there's a lot to figure out as we plan the next stages of this, Mr. Speaker. But the work will continue, and I certainly look forward to sharing that sooner rather than later.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, and I appreciate that answer. And indeed, Islanders do deserve to know what's going on. This is going to impact them individually and collectively quite profoundly. Islanders deserve to know what the government is negotiating on their behalf. And we all know that the current carbon pricing framework, which was signed by the previous administration, of course, has some, shall I say, problems with it, and the Premier has expressed his concerns with the current system that we have. So a question to the Premier, I'm wondering what changes to the carbon pricing system you are pushing for in these negotiations with the federal government.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess in broad terms, how I would answer that question is that what we are really pushing for is to work as a province in coordination with the federal government, who I believe we share a similar vision essentially to where we need to go in terms of pricing carbon, but also just the overall improvement to how we deal with all things environmentally and ecologically here. So I would think that, like the honourable member had indicated, perhaps the rush to get to an agreement the last time left a little bit of questioning as to whether or not these were the right priorities that we were working towards. So I think in a general sense, what I would like to see from these negotiations would be a plan that all Islanders can get behind and an indication of our support of the federal initiatives and the federal support of our own provincial initiatives to get to where we need to go to make the province better. I'm sorry that's a little bit maybe general in terms of my explanation, and probably worthy of some of the eye rolls I'm getting over there. But until we can get to a time when we can talk about where we're at with the negotiations, I would probably try to leave it at that. But I would say to the Honourable Leader and to everyone in this House, you're absolutely right. Islanders need to have an idea of where we are going. So my indication would be, before we get to signing an agreement, that we would share where we were at to get some input. That would be my overall hope. Is that okay? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
To answer the question, not really.
Okay.
That was a whole lot of words and a whole lot of nothing. We've heard from many Islanders that they actually like the idea of a fee and dividend system. That was the model that the Greens brought forward when Islanders were talking about this during the campaign, of course. It would put money directly back in the pockets of Islanders rather than through government programs. And that's the model that the federal government actually later adopted for all the provinces that didn't set up their own carbon pricing system. So the question to the Premier, is such a fee and dividend model, or the federal backstop, for example, is that on the negotiating table?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think everything is on the negotiating table, to be quite honest. I think what I had personally been talking about during the campaign, and the Leader and I had some very good discussions about this during the campaign. I think what I would like to continue to see is to incentivize Islanders to do what they need to be doing and not penalize them for where they live geographically. So I think we all agree that a price on carbon is the way to go to help discourage how we do things and encourage others to change how we do things, whether it's transportation, etc. So I would like to see in place a system that continues to incentivize Islanders to do the things that they want to do, to make it easier for them to do the things that they want to do, Mr. Speaker. But I think all things need to be on the table, Mr. Speaker. I think the federal government, quite frankly and quite honestly, will be a little bit more aggressive in this negotiation than perhaps they were on the last one. So I think maybe that's part of the reason why it's been a little bit tougher, I guess, along the way. But I don't think we're at opposite ends of the spectrum on this. I think we're really just trying to find a way forward that Islanders can be happy and proud of how we are going to move forward together to improve the environment, Mr. Speaker. But I really think that at the federal level, they are much more committed to the goals as and the positions that the leader has outlined than perhaps they were in the last negotiation, from what I understand.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I mean, government has so many options available to them in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. They have investments, they have programs, they have incentives they can offer, they have rebates, there's all sorts of things available to government. But it's been shown time and time again that putting a price on carbon, and I take it from the Premier's remarks there that's really what you're talking about, incentivizing islanders to do the right thing and reward them when they do the right thing. That's what putting a price on carbon actually does. So of all of the options that I've just listed that are available to us, can the Premier tell us which ones are actually cheaper and more effective than actually putting a price on carbon, which has been shown time and time again to be the cheapest and the most effective way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think I would answer that question by saying I do believe, and I've indicated here in this House today and prior to, that a price on carbon, I think, is the way forward, to be honest. And I think that's where the federal government is going to continue to come down on this, and it's our job to work with them to negotiate an agreement that we can continue to incentivize islanders along the way. I think it maybe where we had the minor disagreements that we've had on this has been around what we do in terms of the incentivizing or how we go about sharing the carbon tax and how that gets infiltrated throughout the community in general, Mr. Speaker, and those are good discussions for us to have. But I do think that if anyone is sort of taking that position that there can't be a carbon tax, I think that ship has sailed. I think that's the road we're going to be going down, and I fully expect from the briefings that I've had with the conversation taking place at the federal level that that will continue to be part of the go-forward plan.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important that ministers meet with the departments, the commissions, crown corporations, and agencies whose legislation they oversee. As the minister responsible for the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission, known as IRAC, it would be important to have discussions about what they're doing. So a question to the minister responsible for IRAC: how many times have you met with the commission?
The Honourable Member, Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we meet with them both remotely by telephone as well as in person. And I would say during my time as Minister responsible for IRAC, 5 times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm happy to hear that. So hopefully you've talked about what I'm about to ask you about. So prior to 2015, IRAC's annual reports always indicated the number of Lands Protection Act investigations carried out each year. In the 2015 report, it was reported that the Commission was working on reviewing its penalty processes and that penalties would be held in abeyance until that review was complete. Since this report, IRAC has not publicly reported any investigations. So a question to the minister responsible for IRAC: why did IRAC stop publicly reporting on investigations under the Lands Protection Act?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, of course, in the context of the motion that the Honourable Member brought forward, this is something that I had looked into, definitely. And if you go to the IRAC website, for example, you can look at you can search for lands protection orders that are there and the results of investigations. And indeed, as the member says, they do stop at a certain date. My understanding is they really were issuing small penalties and fines, and they decided to embark on more of an educational route instead of that kind of penalty route. And so in terms of investigations and really these orders that consisted of the penalties, that's why they stopped. But Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that this is something that since the motion I haven't talked to IRAC about, and I want to follow up with them to understand a little bit more because it is concerning to me. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Great, and I appreciate the minister's answer on that, and I would love to hear why that has changed. Because I receive a lot of calls from islanders concerning in contravention of the Lands Protection Act. Many from farmers that feel that they're not on a level playing field when it comes to land. They want transparency. I did table a motion earlier this sitting calling on government to put more transparency into the process of applications as well as investigations of land. That motion was defeated, and the Minister of Agriculture and Land deferred the issue to the Land Matters PEI committee. But the mandate of that committee does not include IRAC. So question to the Minister of Agriculture and Land, have you asked the Land Matters Committee to expand their mandate to also include the IRAC rules of procedure?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Lands Matter Committee, the advisory committee that has been formed, is a great diverse group of stakeholders across this island, Mr. Speaker, that are going to deal with the land matters about land ownership, land protection, Mr. Speaker, and land use. And Mr. Speaker, and if we have to, I will take the members' advice, and I will recommend them to look at IRAC's process. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a long history in our province of using plebiscites to gauge how the public feel on important issues. Many might call it an expressed will of the people, something that should never be taken lightly. A question to the Premier. What does a plebiscite represent to you?
The Honourable Premier. Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for the question. I think, certainly in past, a plebiscite has been used to gauge the opinions of islanders and views of islanders on the issues that are of the utmost importance. The ones I think about most recently would be the mixed member proportional, or the changing the electoral system, and when I was in high school, the plebiscite around the construction of the bridge and the link to the mainland was probably the one that I think about the most when I think about a plebiscite. But I would suppose it's a good way to take the pulse and the opinions of islanders in a very formal way on issues that are important to them. Maybe. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have never had a plebiscite where government ignored the expressed will of the people, aside from the one on democratic reform in 2016. The government of the day decided they didn't like the result and forced islanders to do a do-over, the referendum that was tied to the 2019 election. However, Elections PEI notes that, and I quote, "Following the vote, there was no clear winner, as neither side was able to secure 17 districts." Question to the Premier. Do you agree with Elections PEI that the 2019 referendum produced no clear winner?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would say that we could revisit. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can, Mr. Speaker, in this, having not been involved in the lead up to the first plebiscite and then the creation of the referendum, or the previous government's desire or decision to not follow the results. I would agree that I think the bar that was set for the referendum was probably one that I think was designed to get an outcome, Mr. Speaker, or at least designed to confuse, perhaps. I've been on record as saying that. I think it was a difficult bar to get to, Mr. Speaker. I think that's fair to say. As to why the previous government decided to ignore the plebiscite results and to ask for a do-over, I guess I'm in the chair now and I'm responsible for all of the decisions of government, but I would be hard-pressed to come up with a credible answer to that one, because I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that answer, Premier. Proportional representation strengthens our democracy and puts a truer representation of people in the legislature. It puts people before party in the sense that what the people voted for is reflected in the makeup of the legislature, not what the first-past-the-post system skews. In 2019, we by chance got a government that reflected the overall vote of the population last election, and it resulted in us being the pride of Canada in the change that it brought to the legislature. Question to the Premier. Does the Premier support changing the electoral system so that more representative and collaborative government is the norm, or does he favor the outdated first-past-the-post system that produces less representative and skewed majority governments?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr.
Self-serving.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question. In the lead up to the referendum, I was a proponent of the mixed member proportional system. I do believe that a government that is more reflective of the will of Islanders, Mr. Speaker, should always be the goal here in this legislature. I do think that I love irony and the incredible irony of the electorate to send here an actual mixed member proportional result in a first past the post system. I think was a great bit of irony, Mr. Speaker, and I do agree with the member from Summerside South Drive that the result has been something that has made all Islanders proud and has made us the envy of Canada, Mr. Speaker. So I would continue to support a system of electing representatives that are reflective of the island population, and I think the more Islanders who can see themselves within the government reflected back on them is a really, really good thing, Mr. Speaker, and something we all should aspire to.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a good answer again, Premier. Sounds like you're in support of mixed member proportional. The government insists it's all about people, and plebiscites are the voice of the people. The 2019 referendum resulted in no clear result. However, we did have a clear result in the 2016 plebiscite, the first time we invited 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. We spent $1 million of public funds to ask the people. So we have one clear vote for change and one inconclusive vote. Does the Premier feel that the will of Islanders, as expressed in these plebiscites, is being well served by not proceeding with electoral reform?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the exploration into electoral reform is something that should always happen. There should not be one definitive answer on it. It's something we always should be reviewing, Mr. Speaker. I think we've talked in here about doing things to get more women into the legislature. We talk about things about getting more new Canadians and new Islanders into the legislature, Mr. Speaker, more people of colour into the legislature, Mr. Speaker, and I think all of those things are wrapped up within the whole discussion on electoral reform, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that as a province we never stop having that conversation.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I received an email from a recent graduate of the LPN course at College de Lisle. During the last week of her studies, she learned that she would have to complete an English language proficiency exam in order to practice on PEI, because her first language is not English, even though she is fully bilingual. This test is not administered on PEI and costs $300 plus travel. I would also point out that according to the College de Lisle, 35 to 40% of the course instruction was in English. And this student completed her training at the Prince County Hospital in English. So that's pretty good evidence that she is fully bilingual. Question to the Minister of Health: why would your government allow barriers for nurses who are bilingual, especially during this time of extreme nurse shortages?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the individual that this member speaks about, I've had many conversations with the leader of the third party on this as well. We've involved the College of Nursing as well, because it's actually within their mandate, within their regulations, how this goes. But, Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Health and Wellness, my highest priority, first and foremost, is patient safety. So, Mr. Speaker, we can't just individualize it by one person at a time. We have to look at the whole picture. Mr. Speaker, here at PEI, our healthcare system is delivered first and foremost in the English language, and we need to ensure that individuals that are trained to be medical professionals are proficient in English. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, I would agree with the Minister that we can't just look at one case at a time or one person at a time. We have to learn from the individuals that we're hearing from and identify systemic changes that need to be addressed so that we can break down these barriers for everyone. So this Assembly recently passed amendments to the Regulated Health Professionals Act. In response to questions, the Minister of Health stated his intention was that the amendments would simplify certain requirements regarding the demonstration of English language proficiency, but it seems clear that barriers still exist. Question to the Minister of Health: will you commit to fully funding the English proficiency test for island residents and provide access to the test on Prince Edward Island?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, that's certainly something that we will look at. I'm not going to say no here today. Certainly, we need to work with the regulating body to ensure that the test could be could be taken here on PEI. It's no different than the start of the COVID pandemic, where we had, I believe we had 43 PEI students that were looking to travel to Nova Scotia to write their MCADs to get into medical school, Mr. Speaker. We did everything to try to get the MCAD test provided here on PEI, but Mr. Speaker, I can't twist arms. I can't make a regulating body do what I wish them to do. All I can do is work with them to ensure that we get the best result. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Health. According to the Centre on Substance Abuse, Use and Addictions, our country is in the middle of a serious opioid crisis. There are multiple factors that go into creating the crisis situation we are facing today, but some most commonly heard relate to the frequent prescribing of large amounts of opioids and the opioids being consumed by individuals for which they were not prescribed. Can the Minister tell this House what is the volume of opioids that come into PEI on an annual basis?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want clarification from the honourable member. I'm assuming you're talking about opiates that would come in through illegal means that are prescribed by our physicians?
Yeah, illegal means. The ones that you can justify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't have those details here with me today. I mean, obviously, there's differing drugs, differing opiates, but I would be more than happy to bring that information back. But in addition to that, I want to say that I did question the previous government on this a lot. Previous health ministers, including one that's sitting in the House today, were very forthcoming and willing to work with me on this, and to ensure that we had a structure in place, whereas we were monitoring which doctors were prescribing opiates and the volumes that they were doing so. And if we saw a peak, we would certainly investigate that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
I appreciate the full answer, Minister, and I guess we're looking for some data in various ways to start to talk and to address this issue. We have some mental health concerns in PEI, some addiction issues, so it's good to have this dialogue. We commonly hear the situation where opioids are making their way onto the streets by various means. This is incredibly concerning because, as referenced in my first question, individuals consuming opioids for which they weren't prescribed is further fueling the crisis. In order to begin addressing the issues, we first need to have information required to make informed decisions. Question to the Minister. Does the Minister and his department have any data on the amount of opioids that are making their way onto the streets of PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd have to go back into the department to verify what information we may or may not have on that. Obviously, if someone's accessing a prescription for an opiate, we believe that the individual is taking that prescription and consuming it for their medical requirements. Mr. Speaker, I mean, I'm not privy to the fact that they might have been had a house that was broken into, because we do hear that. There's lots of ways that some of these opiates could get into hands of those that have not been prescribed them. But, Mr. Speaker, we also have other mechanisms in place. I think that Dr. Ron Whalen, he's got an incredible pain clinic going, where rather than consuming opiates, he has a targeted pain clinic where there's actually injections into your pain site so that you do not get addicted to opiates. And I think we need to look at more and more measures like that to keep the reliance of opiates from people. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty, your second supplementary.
And I think that the pain issue is a very good proactive step that I've been talking about recently too. If I had more than just this one last question, I would probably ask a few on those. We've seen here on PEI an increase in opioid-related overdoses in the early days of the pandemic. From January to March in 2020, we saw 0 accidental opioid-related overdoses on PEI, but however, from April to June, during that period, we saw 9 accidental opioid-related overdoses. Of those 9 overdoses that occurred in April to June, 6 involved fentanyl. We know the vast majority of overdoses involve mixed toxicology, which sees a presence of one or more opioids in combination with a non-opioid substance. Question to the Minister. What steps is the Minister and his department taking to combat the nationwide opioid crisis here on PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we're in continual dialogue with the law enforcement agencies here on PEI. And, Mr. Speaker, just perhaps 2 weeks ago, I had an in-depth meeting, my deputy, myself, and the Deputy Chief of Police, Brad McConnell, here in Charlottetown. We talked on this very subject, and Mr. Speaker, one of the alarming things that Deputy Chief McConnell divulged to us is that some addicts are actually now ordering their illegal drugs with fentanyl, and it just astonished me. And I said, why? Why would anybody do that? And he said, because these addicts are looking for the ultimate high. And that's where they're going. Mr. Speaker, it is a very, very serious issue, not only here in PEI, but across Canada, across North America, around the world, in fact. And Mr. Speaker, we all have to do our part to look after the ones we love, the ones that are around us, to make sure that they don't go down that path in the first place. But you know, Mr. Speaker, again, I go back to Dr. Ron Well, and he's got an incredible program that is focused on the pain site rather than just taking a general opiate that is a very, very addictive substance. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record in here, but it's apparent that mental health is on the front burner continuously and every day on PEI recently. And a recent UPEI survey showed that 66% of respondents are struggling with mental health challenges. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, 11% have had thoughts of suicide. And I can tell you from reading that and having a couple children that went to post-secondary, I was very concerned. So I want to ask the Minister today, are you providing any additional resources to our post-secondary institutions based on this survey and the outcome of it?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the survey the Honourable Member mentions was at UPI. I think it took place between November the 2nd to the 9th. 1,131 students participated in the survey, and he's right. Some of the results that came out of the survey were extremely alarming. 63% of respondents said that they had a form of mental health illness, Mr. Speaker, and they identified various reasons for that. They talked about increased costs of tuition. They talked about heavier workload. They talked about the fear of a failure on their academic success level because of online learning, Mr. Speaker. You know, UPI has a terrific program out there. Callie Ross, who is the mental health wellness officer, is doing a tremendous job on campus to support her fellow students. And I have actually had discussions with the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning around this to see how we can better support the campus and that very vulnerable population. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the answer. Mr. Speaker, we've also heard a swell of mental health crisis from organizations from CMHA, policing organizations, Dr. Heather Kaiser, and now Assistant Professor of Psychology Jessica Strong in The Guardian today expressing concern about mental health. A question to the Minister. You have long professed that mobile mental health teams will be a solution to the ongoing crisis, but I am hearing growing concern that these teams are facing extreme challenges. In fact, I've been informed that only employees we've managed to hire one of the employees that we've managed to hire has already left the position, and Dr. Jonathan Dudek is the only employee at the present time. Can the Minister confirm how many employees have been hired specifically for mobile mental health teams to date?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as of a week ago, I believe the count was 2 RNs, 3 counselors, and I think 1 psychologist. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd have to go back in the department to see exactly where we're at now to get an accurate update, and I'd be more than happy to bring that information back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Middlebanks, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we know that virtually all our mental health services are being maxed out, and we know that the mobile mental health teams, Mr. Speaker, are supposed to start in early January of 2021. What we also know is that the QEH has an emergency operations center set up to respond to a possible COVID outbreak. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister. We're dealing with a pandemic of mental health. Will the minister commit here and now to instructing Health PEI to set up an emergency response team at the QEH and QCP in order to better meet the needs of our struggling islanders that are having mental health issues?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we had a lot of discussion on this just a couple of weeks ago with regards to the PUC, the Psychiatric Urgent Care Clinic. As I said, the clinic in Summerside is embedded in the emergency department at PCH. We did have to move the PUC from the Hillsborough Hospital, but it is embedded in the emergency department at the QH. So, short answer is yes, we have that service at the QH emergency department, and we have that service at the Prince County Hospital emergency department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mallory-Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have heard the Minister of Agriculture and Land stand up and proudly claim that his government supports agriculture. And I know the Minister himself is a farmer, and I'm sure he's trying his very best, Mr. Speaker. But I found this claim to be a little bit questionable in light of the government's inaction, certainly after nearly 2 years. Government promised in their election platform that they would conduct a study to get independent science on the issue of supplemental irrigation for agricultural purposes. Minister, what do you say to farmers who are now saying that you are not adequately standing up for the industry and the challenges that they face because they aren't seeing any of the results of your support?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Does he sit on the Water Committee? No. Mr. Chair, thank you for that the question from the Honourable Member. And I think as a farmer myself, Mr. Speaker, and a farmer who has spoken to hundreds of farmers just in the past few months, Mr. Speaker, across this island, and I listened to how they dealt with this summer, the drought conditions, Mr. Speaker. And it breaks my heart to hear a member accuse me of not supporting farmers. And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, I wish I was on the, maybe I shouldn't wish this because it might come true, the committee that presented the report on water use on this island, Mr. Speaker. And I know the member who's asking this question sits on that committee, Mr. Speaker. And I was very disappointed that it really punted things down the road again, Mr. Speaker. It gave government no direction, Mr. Speaker. I'm very disappointed in that, and I wish they would take action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mallory-Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly would note that, yes, I sit on that committee, but so do other members, and I'm one member on the committee, Mr. Speaker. I'm certainly not asking the Minister or this government to immediately start following and allowing high-capacity wells for supplemental irrigation in agriculture, but what is being asked by many in the agricultural community is simply that government follows through with its promise they made. However, it appears they cannot make up their minds to deliver that promise. The ask is to permit the study that will be conducted by Dr. Mike van de Heuvel independently and impartially, and he is with the Canadian Rivers Institute and in conjunction with UPI. Do you agree, Mr. Minister, with the Premier that he claimed that this study would be biased last week? And what are you doing to advocate for farmers who are discriminated on for the lack of access to supplemental irrigation?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure where this question is coming from, Mr. Speaker. I've never heard the Premier say those words, Mr. Speaker, and as former minister himself, Mr. Speaker, he knew the importance of water, Mr. Speaker. Did not do a thing, Mr. Speaker. I inherited, Mr. Speaker, a drought and a department that didn't deal with the situation in time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member from Mallory-Inverness, your second supplementary.
I might add, Mr. Speaker, Minister, you are the minister today. You have the power today. You can't go back to the past. We have heard from experts in the Department of Environment that state that no risk to our water supply exists. The Minister of Education even said that publicly when he was Minister of Environment. Government experts also state PEI receives 2.4 billion cubic meters of water recharge annually with rainfall and snowfall and snowmelt. However, in order to confirm there is no risk, we need to study the issue. Evidence-based decisions using facts and science always are the best way to make decisions. Will the Minister commit to the agricultural community that he will use his position at the Cabinet table to advocate for this study, or is he content to let the discrimination continue with dry growing seasons and no access to supplemental irrigation?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this, The position I'm in, Mr. Speaker, it would be so much easier if the committee that this member sits on had recommended, Mr. Speaker, given this government clear direction, Mr. Speaker, instead of just punting it down the road again, Mr. Speaker. Farmers want action, Mr. Speaker. Farmers deserve modern agriculture, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, members.
Modern agriculture here, Mr. Speaker, is the backbone of our society, Mr. Speaker. Almost $2 billion is the spin-off from agriculture, Mr. Speaker, in this province. That's going to health care, Mr. Speaker. That's going to education, Mr. Speaker. That's going to mental health, Mr. Speaker. Without agriculture, we have nothing, Mr. Speaker. So I support agriculture and I support this government. Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have talked a lot this session about housing. Today I want to take a derivative off that and talk about people that are trying to save up the money to buy their first home. Recently I spoke with some constituents about this very issue. Now, they're a young couple just starting out their careers here on PEI, and of course, as we may all remember, starting out, you have a lot of extra costs, maybe juggling your student loans and of course the cost of living, Mr. Speaker. To make and to save for that down payment for your first home. My question is to the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. What financial assistance is available to aspiring first-time homeowners through the Down Payment Assistance Program?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member. So we certainly have a down payment assistance program through Finance PEI. We've had some great uptake. Approximately 128 have been approved, and now we're living in their own home. And I believe there's approximately 67 that are pre-approved, waiting for a home now, and are out looking actively.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I did a little bit of research on the Down Payment Assistance Program, and I believe the cap purchase price is at $250,000. Now, that's a ceiling that probably made sense when the former government launched the program a few years ago, but just a quick look at MLS or Realtor.ca this morning, and even in my own district, District 10, looking at some home prices ranging from mid-$275,000 to $330,000 for bungalows. And according to industry statistics, the average home sale price on Prince Edward Island year-to-date for 2020 is about $277,000. For October, that figure was close to $300,000, which is above the price ceiling for the Down Payment Assistance Program. Question to the same minister, will you commit to looking at raising the ceiling for home prices in the Down Payment Assistance Program guidelines to better reflect the market realities?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member. It's been a while since I've been in the real estate game, so I'll be honest, I didn't know them numbers or where they are at right now. Certainly whatever I can do. I don't see the real estate market slowing down in PEI anytime soon. We've got people moving here all the time. We've got a beautiful place to live, and I think we're going to be into this for a while. So I'll certainly commit going back to my department to see if we can up that threshold and do whatever we can to help get people into their own homes.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know a lot of people who dream of home ownership will appreciate you looking into that to make their dream of owning their first home a little bit more affordable. Of course, there are a lot of fees involved with that first home purchase. A lot of sales are driven by older homeowners downsizing. Of course, as parents, we want to make the best for our family, and I know that there are some programs in place for the fishing industry where some fees can be waived if fishing gear maybe changes hands, but it stays within the family. So a question to the same minister, is there any maybe similar approach that could be used for a first-time home buyer who's purchasing that first home from a family member? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member. Certainly a good point. I remember the first time my wife and I bought our first home, and that was a problem we had trying to save that extra money for the fees with the lawyers and the land transfer tax at the time. So I'll certainly commit to going back. Obviously, everything I do, every program I roll out, we run numbers to see if it's feasible. If I can make it happen, I'll certainly do my best to do so.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognize that using a gender-based analysis lens on a capital budget is a huge undertaking, and I asked several times if the Interministerial Women's Secretariat was resourced enough to do this. Last night I was having a conversation with the minister responsible for the status of women, and she told me that there had not been a gender-based analysis done on it, as it is a big task, and committed to doing so in the next budget. Question to the minister responsible for status of women, can you please share with us the implementation plan?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the honourable member for bringing this to the forefront and ensuring that it is an important topic that is discussed in this legislature. And I certainly do appreciate all of her questions during the capital budget, and I was really pleased to have that conversation and to provide a response to those questions yesterday in the House. Certainly, this is a tremendous undertaking, and in speaking with my director of the Interministerial Secretariat, she is beyond excited about the fact that this is at the forefront and that this is a priority for government. So although we haven't yet defined exactly what that review of the capital budget is going to look like, we have, as I've indicated previously in this House, we have established the task force for gender and diversity, and certainly those terms of reference I did provide to the member across as well. And as we move forward, we are looking to defining that and working with the Minister of Finance and my colleagues to ensure that a gender and diversity lens is taken across all decisions, including the capital budget. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to hear that. We were kind of led to believe all along it was being done, so I appreciate the honesty. As mentioned, there has been this task force for advancing gender equity and diversity struct. I looked over the list of women on this task force, and they're impressive and absolutely up to this important task, the ones I do know. I have no idea if there's any representation from the BIPOC community, if there's anyone living with disabilities, if there's representation from the LGBTQ2SIA community, etc. Question to the same minister, did you ensure that there was representation from these groups, among others, on your committee?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I have a great deal of faith in the department, who, as well as my deputy minister, who did put forward the recommendations for this committee. I have reviewed, and certainly I'm really pleased with the diversity. But that being said, I can absolutely take another look at it just to ensure that we are covering all bases. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are so many organizations in our community who are doing incredible work and who have been advocating for this. They have unique firsthand experience working with women and those who identify as women. They have a deep understanding of the issues and have practical, concrete, innovative, unique thoughts on things like barriers that women face when trying to enter male-dominated fields, for example. Their voices are crucial at this committee level, and it would be an injustice to not have them part of it. Question to the same minister, will you commit to adding community groups to this committee, and can I please work with you to identify them?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's an absolutely wonderful idea. I do pride myself on the communication that I do have with all the community groups, as well as I know my director of the Interministerial Secretariat. She has just an incredible relationship with all these groups, and certainly I'd love to have them participate in the conversation. So let's work together on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, each year on December the 6th, we pause to remember the 14 women killed at l'École Polytechnique de Montréal in 1989. These women were targeted and killed because they were studying in a field that had traditionally been considered a male profession. On December 6th, we also take the time to remember the 10 island women who have been murdered since 1989. These are women who were murdered by men they knew. We also mourn missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the countless others whose lives were cut short by gender-based violence. We mourn for survivors and those who continue to live under the shadow of violence. 2020 has been an incredibly challenging year for women. There have been times when social isolation and social distancing have been necessary to ensure safety for islanders. People have needed to stay at home, but not every home is safe. It is important to continue to state help is available. Providing safe places for women and children escaping violence is an essential service, and it will continue to be essential. This Sunday, December 6th at noon, Montreal Massacre Memorial Services will take place online. We would like to acknowledge the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women and the hard work they have done to make this online event a powerful one. While we cannot gather in person, we can gather together in spirit, and I would encourage everyone to take part in this event online. You can do so by visiting the PEI Status of Women website or visiting their Facebook page. Individually, we all take a role. We all need to recognize and reflect on how we treat women. Words and actions can speak volumes. Inaction can speak just as loudly. We need to be mindful of the impact of our choices. Before I close, Mr. Speaker, I would like to read the names of the women who were killed. Then I will ask for your indulgence and for all members to stand and join me for a moment of silence. The 14 women who were killed in Montreal were Genevieve Bergeron, Hélène Colgan, Nathalie Croteau, Barbara Daigneault, Anne-Marie Adouard, Maude Avernique, Maryse Lagagna, Maryse Leclerc, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, Michelle Richard, Annie St. Arnaud, Annie Turcotte, Barbara Kluznik Wodajevich. Here in Prince Edward Island, the 10 women who were killed were Carrie Crossman, Elaine Myers, Shirley Ann Duguay, Della Waddell, Mary Waite, Kimberly Ann Byrne, Debbie Holmes, Crystal Dawn Baristo, Maureen McDonnell, and Tracy Lynch. If all members could join me in standing for a moment of silence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank the minister responsible for the status of women for reading out those names. It's important that we say those names and that we hear those names, as hard as it is to get them out. It's so wonderful and supportive, the community organizations that we have working towards eradicating, educating for violence against women, gender-based violence. And, you know, to remind us all in here that we are the ones in the unique position to make the systemic level changes to truly eradicate that, so that we don't have to stand up in here every year and read off new names of women who have potentially been murdered at the hands of someone that they know. I've stood a few times and said this, and I'll say it again. What the member from Mermaid Stratford had said earlier about the 3 calls to action that Don Wilson so beautifully articulated, and the things that we really need to work towards in here to make those systemic level changes, one of which was presented in the form of the committee report, encouraging government to implement a basic income guarantee. That is one of the single biggest things that we can do at a systemic level to prove that we understand and that we do want to work towards eradicating this. Public transit, access to emergency funds, and safe, accessible, affordable housing. Those asks are pretty clear. And so, you know, this Sunday, I will take some time with my family, and we will, as I mentioned yesterday, create that community that we need to deal with these topics together. And so I thank the Minister for the statement, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to thank the Minister. It's not easy what you did, and you did a great job. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I had the honor of lighting a candle for one of those women. And as they were reading out some information about her, I remember the points I remember hearing, that she was born in 1967 and died in 1989. And she liked omelets with shrimp. I mean, she didn't deserve that, and neither did any of those women. And we need to do more in Prince Edward Island, and I think I want to thank the organizations who do a lot on behalf, but men play a role in curbing violence. And there's a group in Prince Edward Island called the Man Up Group, and their mandate is to stand up and say that violence against women is not okay under any circumstances. And we have to start with messages like that with our youth, because our daughters and our mothers and our sisters, if we're men, deserve that. And this is the time, and I just want to thank again the Minister for speaking so eloquently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table an email from Benoit Morin, the Vice President of Sales from Lion Bus Company, indicating that they do not have vehicle grid technology, contrary to what you've been led to believe by the member from Summerside, and I move seconded by the Health Minister that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the Prince Edward Island School Athletics Association's Policy Review Committee Terms of Reference. And this is the committee that will be struck to review the PEI SAA policy and procedures and provide a final report to the Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning, and the Minister responsible for status of women for their approval regarding, welcome and support all athletes, including gender equity. And I move, seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, that the said document be now received and lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a written question to the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, and I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a written question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing, and I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table 7 written questions to the Minister of Health and Wellness, and I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table 1 written question to the Premier, and I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a written question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, and I move, seconded by the member from Mermaid Stratford, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table questions to the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Victoria Park, that said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
House, I beg leave to table written response to written question number 133, which I tried to table by email, which is not allowed, so I'm tabling it in my document. And I move, seconded by the member of Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism, Culture, said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the response to the July 2020 report from the Special Committee on Climate Change, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Finance, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table a news release from the company that the Minister for Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy mentioned earlier, indicating that their vehicle-to-grid technology is available on all of their vehicles. This was a recent news release from November 19th, 2020. And I move, seconded by Summerside Wilmot, that the said document do be now received and do lie on the table. Sorry.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table the Beverage Container Program 2019-2020 annual report, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Health and Wellness, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? Carry. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would humbly ask to seek unanimous consent on...
No.
No? Okay.
I'll leave. Is there any more tabling of documents? Honourable members, pursuant to Section 46 of the Legislative Assembly Act, I wish to advise that I received a 2020 report of the Indemnities and Allowance Commission. I moved that the report of the Commission be received and do lie on the table. Shall it carry? Carry. Thank you. Reports by committees. The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Montague-Kilmuir, that the report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts tabled yesterday, entitled Committee Activities, be adopted. This report is an account of the committee's activities since its last report on June 16, 2020. The committee has met on 9 occasions since then, and this report summarizes the purposes of those meetings and the witnesses appearing before the committee and the decisions made. The report includes the following recommendations. Recommendation number 1, your committee endorses the recommendations resulting from the performance of the financial audits in the 2020 report of the Auditor General to the Legislative Assembly and encourages government to commit to their timely implementation. Number 2, your committee finds that full implementation of recommendations from the 2015 audits of Access PEI and management of contaminated sites is long overdue, and calls on the departments responsible to put priority on implementation without further delay. Number 3, your committee stresses the overall implementation rates of audit recommendations need to improve. The performance audits of 2012 achieved a 93% implementation rate. In the years following, they began declining and fell to 33% in 2015. The rate recovered somewhat in 2016 to 64% and fell again to 43% in 2017. This is a worrying trend. Recommendation number 4, the committee recommends that boards, agencies, and Crown corporations consider any necessary changes that would facilitate submission of audited financial statements to the Comptroller in time for inclusion in Volume 3 of the Annual Public Accounts of the Province. Number 5, your committee reminds departments and reporting entities to submit annual reports in a timely fashion in compliance with any legislative, regulatory, and policy deadlines. And finally, number 6, your committee requests that government respond to this report and to its previous 2 reports as directed by Rule 110.9, which states, a written executive response shall be tabled in the House during the next seasonal sitting following the adoption of the committee report. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully submit this report. Ask for adoption of the report. Is that what I do? Yeah. Is that what I say?
Is there anyone else willing to speak to the report? No? Should the report carry?
Carried.
Report's carried, Honourable Member. Introduction of government bills. Government motions. Order of the day, government. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture that the 8th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Order number 8, Children's Law Act, Bill number 57, in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture that the bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry? Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you. I move second by the Honourable Member, or Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture that this House do now resolve itself in the Committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Row, Chair of the Committee of the whole House, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House taking into consideration the bill to be entitled Children's Law Act. Honourable members, a request has been made to bring strangers onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Honourable members, we also left off on page 23, section 34. This section has been read, and we are currently debating this section. Would you please state your name and title for answer, please?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist, Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you.
Claire Henderson, Director of Family Law and Court Services with the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you. So, Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. I can't quite recall if we got all the way through my very last question there at the end of the night. So could you provide examples of services that might have been refused previously?
We had talked about, for example, if one parent who had parenting time or decision-making responsibility under an order wanted to take a child to see a psychologist or a therapist, that under the previous regime, because of the requirements of the professional organizations, consent would be required from both parents, which could be denied by one, impeding access to services for the child.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. And the services denied, are those usually psychological services for the child? Is that the typical?
Generally, yes.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. How do you define services? For instance, would it encompass religious practices?
Services in this context would be like services like a therapeutic provider or like music therapy. Religion and upbringing is dealt with under the previous sections of the Act in relation to decision-making responsibility and the entitlements of parents.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. And in subsection 4, could you just explain this subsection so it's on the record?
So subsection 4 just talks about the right of the parents to be presumed to have decision-making responsibility where the child lives with one parent with the either implied consent or acquiescence of the other parent.
Summerside South Drive.
That's good for me.
Oh, he's good? Okay. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Section 35. Shall the section, Charlottetown Victoria Park.
So this section is updated from the Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act?
Yes.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
So what are the changes that have been made under that?
This section is merely updated so that it reflects the new terminology and language in the Divorce Act.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And can you just briefly describe what the factors would be?
Sorry, the factors under the Divorce Act in subsection 5?
Yes, please.
So the Divorce Act sets out particular considerations for the court to consider when dealing with an application for removing a child from a jurisdiction. And so things like, again, it's all about the best interest consideration of the child and the impact of the move on the child.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
I'm good for now, Chair. Thank you.
Just a quick question.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And this might not apply, but I'd just like to understand jurisdiction. So when there is an order and one parent lives outside, like it lives in a different jurisdiction, is there any challenges with especially COVID restrictions and that kind of thing that have been experienced, or that this act would like allow that you know what I mean, the transportation between jurisdictions?
So this particular section refers to when the court has the legal jurisdiction to issue an order. It's not specifically about the physical location of a child in one particular jurisdiction or another. This section talks about the authority of the court to get involved, meaning the court's legal jurisdiction.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Is there any section, is there any area within the Act that we talk about that? Is it further on, or?
So later in the Act, when we get to starting at section 45, that talks about the relocation and the location of a child.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm great, thanks, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Section 36. Charlottetown Victoria Park.
So this section is talking about just focusing on the best interests of the child, and that's kind of at the section, the center of every decision and contact order. So thrilled to see that in there, of course. Is this different from the existing legal framework for these types of orders?
So in terms of the what's called the parentis patriae jurisdiction of the court is always required to consider the best interests of the child. This puts it down in writing so that it is clear and that it is communicated to anyone involved in a court proceeding. So this is a change, but it really is enshrining the rights of children in the legislation.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. That's so awesome. In subsection 2, makes reference to the child's, is that? Where am I here? Sorry, Chair.
No problem.
It makes reference to the child's cultural, linguistic, religious, and spiritual upbringing and heritage. Is that in here? Is that, okay. It is in there?
So it refers back to section 33, which includes that particular provision. The subsection 2 says of everything in section 33, the first thing the court needs to consider is the child's physical, emotional, and psychological safety, security, and well-being. So while all of the best interest considerations in 33 are important for the court to consider, first primary concerns are always the child's physical, emotional, and psychological safety, security, and well-being.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And so for the purposes of this subsection, does government consider the child's physical, emotional, and psychological safety, security, and well-being as encompassing or being separate from Indigenous upbringing and heritage as referenced in section 33?
So this section of the legislation applies to the court's consideration and not, so it's not a government exercise. It's what the judge presiding over the matter has to consider. And all of section 33, which includes the cultural considerations and including the Indigenous heritage of the child, are also considered.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
I'm good for now, Chair. Thank you.
Shall the section carry?
Carried.
Section 37. Shall section 37 carry?
Carried.
Section 38. Shall Charlottetown Victoria Park?
Thank you, Chair. So this section allows for the appointment of a person with relevant technical or professional skills to assess and report the needs of the child. What kind of technical or professional skills would those be?
So this section allows the court to appoint effectively an expert witness to provide independent evidence to the court about the current parenting arrangements for the child and the best interests of the child, and to make recommendations. Ultimately, that designation is at the discretion of the court, and that's an analysis that's undertaken by the court. Generally speaking, for example, we have staff at the Family Law Center who are clinicians. They hold masters in social work and significant training in child interviewing, child well-being, considerations of family violence, things like that. And so, but ultimately, that's a court determination as to whether somebody meets the technical requirements.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And could you elaborate on how the court should interpret the word needs for the purpose of this section?
Ultimately, that interpretation is at the discretion of the court and would be unique to the particular circumstances of the particular child. The needs of one child may be different than the needs of a number of children, and so again, that's a unique circumstance that would be particular to the court, and that is why this section exists, to help the court understand what those particular needs are for that particular unique child's circumstances.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So it's looking at kind of the big picture in terms of how, not just child-centered, but child-centered, uniquely child-centered based on each individual child.
Yes.
That's great.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. In subsection 9, this section allows the clinician appointed under subsection 5 to interview persons who provide health services to the child or a parent of the child, and to obtain personal information, and despite any other act and without consent. The report stemming from these interviews would then be provided to the court and the parties involved. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any limits on this authority?
So the limit on the authority would be subject, obviously, to any court order that was ordering the clinician to prepare the report. This particular subsection was contemplated to ensure that when clinicians are providing parenting arrangement assessments to the court, that they are getting all of the information that is necessary to ensure that the court has a complete picture of the needs and best interests of the child that's before the court.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And do you have any concerns that any irrelevant health information about a person could be introduced into the court, and that could be used in a negative way against the other party?
So again, the clinician that's preparing the report is an expert with significant training in terms of like child interviewing and the best interest of children. The information inherent in the request is that the information has to be required for the assessment. And certainly the clinicians that are engaging in this work are seeking information that is relevant to the court for the purposes of making decisions about the best interest of children.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Is there a plan to educate stakeholders on their obligations to respond to interview requests under this subsection?
This subsection is comparable to existing pieces of legislation that, for example, the functions of the children's lawyer under the Judicature Act, and, for example, information demand powers provided to the Director of Maintenance Enforcement. When these requests go out, they go out with a letter that details the legal requirements and the timelines for responding to the requests. And clinicians are also available to take inquiries from people in receipt of these letters in relation to the legal impact of the request.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And so in subsection 66(2) allows the court to seal a financial statement if it believes the public disclosure of any information from that statement would result in hardship on the person. Is there a reason why a similar protection is not offered here?
This act has provisions that allow the court to close the family court file to the public, and as a matter of practice, as a result of that piece, which is transferred over from the Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, family court files are not accessible to anyone other than parties to the proceedings.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just, okay, so subsection 15. Does this subsection say that the child receives a copy of the report only if they have their own lawyer?
Yes.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
My last question. I just want to make sure that there's a provision in subsection 19 that allows for the court to not identify the workplace.
So section 19 includes, as a result of our consultation with family violence groups and wanting to be consistent throughout the legislation, a direction that allows the court, in appropriate circumstances, to direct that identifying information is not included in the report, including where there is a risk of family violence. You'll also note that the court can provide directions in relation to the timing of the provision of the report to the parties, and that is also in response to being able to address potential family violence concerns.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
For now, Chair, thank you.
Shall the section carry?
Carried.
Section 39. Shall section 39 carry? Carried. Section 40. Shall section 40 carry?
Carried.
Section 41. With Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Can you provide examples of common allocations of decision-making responsibility? Is it usually like 50-50 or 100% or other arrangements?
Again, the default presumption under the legislation is that parents are equally entitled to decision-making responsibility, but the court also has the discretion to allocate the decision-making responsibility, which would include saying things like, well, the first parent can make decisions about like what sports the kids are involved in, and the second parent gets to make decisions about what type of artistic extracurricular activities the kids are able to be involved in.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm good.
Shall the section carry?
Carried.
Section 42. Shall section 42 carry? Section 43. Section 43 carry? Section 44. Shall section 44 carry?
Carried.
Section 45. Shall section 45 carry? Mermaid Stratford.
So I will re-ask my question again. So in this section, if the parents live in separate jurisdictions, how is that treated? I guess in conjunction with other pieces of legislation, like how do you interpret this?
So this particular piece of the legislation is modeled after changes made to the relocation process through the federal changes to the Divorce Act. Ultimately, decisions about the residence and location of the child and even the transfer of the child between the parties is something that can be addressed in the specific court order. The authority for the court to issue that order is under this piece of legislation, but obviously there can be competing legislative regimes and circumstances like emergency public health orders that may require further direction from the court as to impact.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And because this is very real to us right now, how does this impact kids that are traveling from, in between parents that might be now outside, like the Atlantic region, for instance, when we were in the bubble, or even now where we're no longer in the Atlantic bubble? How does that impact?
So ultimately, parents and children are required to comply with the public health orders in our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions. The Family Law Center has worked with the Public Health Office, and we have a frequently asked question page that addresses those issues and provides information for parents that are parenting from 2 different locations during the pandemic.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you for that. So we're getting close to Christmas, obviously, and this is when orders, like, if they live in different jurisdictions, we would typically have orders at this point in time where a child would reside with a certain parent or another parent during the Christmas holidays or during school vacations, etc. Can you just give me a general idea of, like, how is that all being handled, like, this year, knowing that we are in a pandemic and we may not have our bubble open or our jurisdiction open?
So ultimately, again, this legislation applies to like private legal rights between parties. And so the particular circumstances of the parties may vary. And ultimately, it may be that some individuals, if they can't come to agreements as to what the situation should be in light of the public health situation, they may need to seek further direction from the court. Again, the Family Law Center has worked with our clinicians and the co-parent action team to create frequently asked questions and information to assist parties with trying to consider the best interests of children when making like private decisions about how their order may be impacted.
Mermaid Stratford.
So, thank you, Chair. So let's say the order is that they spend 1 week with their parent, but we know that there's a 14-day isolation quarantine process when you come from outside the bubble. If a child leaves and does that 1 year with another parent, what is the requirement when they come back? And I'm asking because I've had this question a number of times of what is the parent's right, when the child comes back, and if they're back in time for school, do they go to school or are they quarantining?
So ultimately, individuals need to be complying with public health orders and the direction in relation to like self-isolation requirements. All of this is available on the CPHO website and would not necessarily be relevant to this particular piece of legislation. The interpretation of competing orders is like a private matter between parties. Again, we have very specific and helpful information on the government COVID page about considerations that families need to consider when impacted by different parenting arrangements.
Mermaid Stratford.
I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Shall this section carry?
Carried.
Section 46. So section 46, Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Just a moment. I'm going to bring up my questions here. Sorry, so to be clear in this section, the relocation for the purposes of this section only means relocation where there's an expected significant impact on a child's relationship with other parents or permitted contacts, correct?
Yes.
And for further clarity, a relocation that would require a child to change schools or communities would not necessarily be considered a relocation for the purposes of this section?
So you'll see that in the definitions section, at the beginning of this part, there is a definition of relocation. Again, what the interpretation of these definitions are going to be in relation to particular circumstances of parties. There may be further interpretation from the court. What I can tell you is that this particular section is entirely consistent with the relocation provisions and definitions in the Federal Divorce Act, which ensures that if there is a decision from the court that would provide further interpretation, it will then be consistent between the application of the provincial law and the application of the federal law.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you. So neither a yes or no, that's in the hands of the judiciary.
As is often the case.
Yes.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So a notice of relocation requires at least 60 days before the relocation. However, we know that there are challenges with the economy and the housing market that might require a parent to move spontaneously. How does this act address those circumstances?
So ultimately, as with much in this act, there is discretion for the parties to go to court to seek a court order allowing them to act outside of the timelines set out in this legislation. So if somebody didn't have 60 days to wait, they would have the right to make an application to the court to have the matter dealt with in an expedited fashion, and ultimately it would be the decision of the court as to whether or not that move would be in the best interest of the child.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So expedited fashion, do you have any idea how long that usually takes? I know you couldn't say for sure, but is that like we're talking a couple of days or a couple of weeks or?
Again, the timing and scheduling of matters that come before the court is at the discretion of the court. That's a judicial administration issue. But ultimately, when there are matters that impact children, and particularly where there's jurisdictional, and I mean that in the provincial lines way, our court is very responsive and nimble.
Very good. Thank you. I'm good, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Section 47. Shall section 47 carry? Section 48. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So Section 33 of this Act makes the child's Indigenous heritage and upbringing a factor in determining the best interest of a child. Could you explain how the Indigenous heritage and upbringing would be weighed and when considering relocation, given Canada's history of moving Indigenous peoples out of their communities?
So again, this Act relates to private circumstances between individual parties and not actions of government in relation to the moving and directions toward children. And so you'll note subsection 1 says, in addition to the factors in 33, and so the court in every instance, in every exercise of discretion under this Act, has a primary consideration of the best interests of children, including their Indigenous and cultural heritage.
Summerside South Drive.
And could you just explain subsection 2, what it means in practice?
So what it means is the court can't turn around, the court is not allowed to consider whether or not, depending on the decision of the court, the parent would move anyway. So the court can't say, well, you're going to move anyway even if I say no, so the kid can stay here.
Summerside South Drive.
I'm good.
Shall the section carry? Carry. Section 49. Shall section 49 carry?
Carry.
Section 50. Section 50 carry?
Carry.
Section 51.
Carry.
51 carry. Section 52. Shall section 52 carry? Section 53. Shall section 53 carry? Carry. Section 54. Summerside South Drive.
So just a broad question on actually sections 54 and 257. What discussions has the province had with other provinces and possibly other countries on the question of extra-provincial orders?
There are a number of other pieces of legislation and agreements that the province has in relation to the enforcement of foreign and reciprocal orders throughout the province. This entire section of the Act is actually existing legislation that we took from the Custody, Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act.
Summerside South Drive.
That's good, thanks.
Shall the section carry? Carry. Section 55. Shall section 55 carry? Carry. Section 56. Shall section 56 carry? 57. Shall section 57 carry? Section 58, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have an amendment in this section. This motion replaces Section 58 of the Bill number 57 and adds a new Section 58 in respect of the obligation to provide child support for a child. And I have copies. I think the copies.
Okay, there are copies and they'll be distributed to each member. Just be a moment.
Chair, did you want
Minister of Justice?
Did you want Blair to read the motion?
If you want to read it while we're, yes, sure.
I'll ask Blair to read it, and maybe he can explain it.
Sure. 58, the section note is obligation to support child, subsection 1. Subject to subsection 2, a person has an obligation to provide child support for a child to the extent the person is capable of doing so, where A, the person is a parent of the child, or B, the person has demonstrated a settled intention to treat the child as a child of the person, except under an arrangement where the child is placed for valuable consideration in a foster home by the Director of Child Protection. Subsection 2, the obligation referred to in subsection 1 applies where the child is A, unmarried and under the age of 18 years, B, 18 years of age or older and enrolled in a full-time education program, or C, 18 years of age or older and unable, by reason of illness, disability, or other cause, to withdraw from the charge of the person or to obtain the necessaries of life.
Thank you. Just to be clear, promoter, this motion, you're putting forward this motion that was just read?
Yes.
You're the mover. Thank you. Did you want to give just a brief description of the amendment?
Sure. When we were reviewing the bill after first reading, we noted that there was a substantive change in the law that was affected by Section 58 as it currently reads in the bill that was unintended. So this amendment basically restores the statement of the existing law, which is to say that parents have an obligation to support children, but also persons who have demonstrated a settled intention to treat the child as their own child. So that is the purpose of the amendment. It's to correct an inadvertent omission in the original draft.
Great. Thank you very much. Honourable members, are there any questions on the amendment? Shall the amendment carry? Carry. I'm going to ask again, since we're into a new part, and the request was made yesterday, just for a brief overview of the content of this part.
So Part 6 is a continuation, it's a the bring over of the child support provisions from the Family Law Act. You will see that these section is substantially similar to the sections in the Family Law Act, except we have updated the terminology to reflect parenting time, decision-making, responsibility, and contact with the child. There is a new section that allows for the court to request an expert witness to provide information to the court about complex financial matters. And we have also made updates to allow the court to consider the potential impact of family violence when making orders to release information. And so other than those changes, this is substantially similar to the existing law of the province as would be found in the Family Law Act.
Thank you. Section 59. Shall Section 59, Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Did we skip over 58?
I'm sorry. Section 58. So Section 58, we just did an amendment to it. And so I read it, sorry, but it was amended. But if you want to have a question on it, you can ask.
Okay. I'm just wondering, for Clause B, thank you, Chair. For Clause B, if you can elaborate on the full-time education program a little bit. Is that still in there now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So that this Clause 58, particularly with the amendment, aligns it directly with the existing law of the province. This definition of the obligation to support is in the existing Family Law Act.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So it includes, is it restricted to undergraduate education?
No, it just says full-time education, but ultimately it is the jurisdiction of the court to issue a support order, which would include if and when the obligation for support terminates.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. That's good.
You're welcome. Shall Section 58 carry as amended?
Carry.
Section 59. Shall Section 59 carry? Carry. Section 60. Shall Section 60 carry?
Carry. Oh. Sorry, Chair. I got lost there. for a second.
So we were on section 60?
Yep.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. What recourse is available if a party does not comply with an order to provide child support?
So there are powers later in the Act that talk about the authority of the court to take steps if a party is in contempt of an order. As we discussed yesterday, all support orders in the province can be registered with the Maintenance Enforcement Program, who have powers and tools to take steps to enforce the payment of support in the province.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. In subsection 5, could you provide an example where more than one party would have an obligation to provide child support?
So, for example, sometimes a application for child support comes in, individual contests that they are in fact the parent of the child and therefore may not have a support obligation, and they may say that there's another individual that is in fact the parent of the child, and they can add that third person to the application for the purposes of the court determining who is the individual who has the obligation to pay support.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And subsection 8, who determines the child support guidelines, and is there a place where we can access them?
The PEI has adopted the federal child support guidelines. They're available on the Justice Canada website. They have a very helpful look-up function.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
That's great. Thank you, Chair.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Claire, just a moment ago, you mentioned the tools that maintenance enforcement had. And when you came to the Public Accounts Committee, you had mentioned about looking at other tools. Is there any changes to what the maintenance enforcement department has for resources now?
So the maintenance enforcement program is actually under a separate piece of legislation, and the maintenance enforcement program would not be impacted by the Children's Law Act, other than the change in terminology in the orders that they're seeing.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you had mentioned that one was being reviewed as well. Is that still the case?
It is on our list.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Great, thanks, Chair.
You're welcome. Shall section 60 carry?
Carry.
Section 61. Shall section 61 carry?
Carry.
Section 62. Shall section 62 carry?
Carry.
Section 63. Shall section 63 carry?
Carry.
Section 64. Shall section 64 carry?
Carry.
Section 65. Shall section 65 carry?
Carry.
Section 66. Shall section 66 carry? Section 67. Shall section 67, Victoria Park. Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering how this section works for employers who may pay cash.
So this section allows the court to order an employer to provide particular information about the amount that they're paying. And so it wouldn't necessarily, it's not concerned with the form of payment, it's the amount of payment for the purposes of the calculation of the appropriate support for the party.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair, that's good.
You're welcome. Shall section 67 carry?
Carry.
Section 68. Shall section 68 carry? Section 69. Shall section, 69, yes. Shall
Question, Chair.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you. Could you just explain the agreement between the provincial government and the federal government in this section?
So we have an agreement with the federal government because our provincial recalculation office, for example, recalculates federal support orders. And because there's a difference in jurisdiction between the federal order and the provincial service, we have an agreement that allows us to engage in that recalculation on behalf of the federal government.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
That's good, Chair.
Shall section 69 carry?
Carry.
Part 7. Claire, would you like to just give a brief overview of this one?
This part is a continuation of the existing provisions in the Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act that relate to our obligations under the Hague Convention on Child Abduction.
Thank you. Section 70, Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Chair, could you explain what that means?
So we are, Canada is a signatory to the Hague Convention on Child Abduction. It's a convention that creates a process for a procedure for parties who are alleging that one parent has taken a child without lawful authority out of a country to engage in applications between countries to have the child, to get an order to have the child returned.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And there's a regulation-making power in this section. Could you elaborate on what regulations you would anticipate making under this section?
So the Hague Convention is a schedule to the Act. There are currently no regulations. That reg-making authority is there in the event that something comes up that requires further direction in the form of a regulation. So we don't currently have regulations. It's just as needed.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Chair, that's good.
You're welcome. Shall Section 70 carry?
Carried.
Section 71. Shall Section 71 carry?
Carried.
Section 72. Shall Section 72 carry?
Carried.
Section 73. Shall Section 73 carry?
Carried.
Section 74. Shall Section 74 carry?
Carried.
Section 75. Shall Section 75 carry?
Carried.
Section 76. Shall Section 76 carry?
Carried.
Section 77. Shall Section 77 carry? Section 78. Charlottetown Victoria Park.
So this section allows the minister to authorize an employee of the department to collect or disclose personal information or personal health information with other government employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if it's standard practice to consult with the Information and Privacy Commissioner on these matters.
We did engage the Privacy Commissioner in consultation. We also consulted with the Provincial APSO Department. And so we have received consultation on these provisions from the Privacy Commissioner and considered that consultation when reviewing the bill.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Shall Section 78 carry?
Carried.
Section 79. Shall Section 79 carry?
Carried.
Section 80. Shall Section 80 carry?
Carried.
Section 81. Shall Section 81 carry?
Carried.
Section 82. Shall Section 82 carry? Section 83. Shall Section 83, Charlottetown Victoria Park.
One question on this. I'm wondering if you could explain the purpose of this section.
So this section we put in based on jurisdictional scans that we did. So the Child Support Guidelines Office in the Department of Justice and Public Safety at the Family Law Center provides information and assistance to parties who are making applications for child support. That information and assistance does not include providing parties legal advice. We included this for greater certainty to ensure that everybody understands that the staff and dispute resolution professionals that are assisting parties to resolve issues are not engaging in the practice of law.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
That's good. Thank you, Chair.
Shall Section 83 carry?
Carried.
Section 84. Shall Section 84 carry?
Carried.
Section 85. Shall Section 85 carry?
Carried.
Section 86. Shall Section 86 carry?
Carried.
Section 87.
Question,
Shall
Chair.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 87(2)E. Could you give us a sense what the regulations will look like with respect to assessing whether family violence has occurred?
So we're currently in the process of drafting those regulations, and we will be engaging in consultation to ensure that those regulations are inclusive of the types of training that the kind of experts in these areas feel are appropriate.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And are there any groups, what groups would you consult for those regulations?
We would likely consult with the same groups that we consulted with in the preparation of this act, which would include, I have a list, it's quite lengthy.
I wrote that list out.
We consulted with the Provincial Victim Services Department, the Premier's Action Committee on Family Violence Protection, PEI Family Violence Prevention Services, the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and the Child and Youth Advocate Office, specifically in relation to the family violence concerns.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. And just wondering, have these regulations been drafted yet, or is that kind of a work in progress?
They are in progress, not as we speak because we're here, but later.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Shall Section 87 carry?
Carried.
Part 9. Claire, would you like to give a brief overview of this part?
So this part is a kind of the technical piece of the bill that allows for the transition between the previous Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act and the provisions in the Family Law Act and the Child Status Act. So this entire section just allows there to be a seamless transfer between the previous legislation and this legislation.
Thank you. Section 88. Shall Section 88 carry?
Carried.
Section 89. Shall Section 89 carry?
Carried.
Section 90. Shall Section 90 carry?
Carried.
Section 91. Shall Section 91 carry? Section 92. Shall Section 92 carry? Section 93.
Chair.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions. I'm done asking. I feel like I'm done asking, but I would just really like to take this opportunity to say thank you to the minister and for our two strangers on the floor for bringing this piece of very important legislation forward. And I really look forward to seeing what changes this makes for our island families, and I'm really excited about it. I really hope we have the services and supports in place to really make this, these pieces of paper really come to life in a really real way that will help it make island families happier and healthier. And I'm good. Thank you.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park, are you suggesting that we carry the bill?
If nobody else has any
You want
questions.
to put the question out? Okay. Honourable members, should the bill carry?
Carry.
Honourable members, shall the schedule carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
Children's Law Act shall carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair.
This one.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to with amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House having under consideration the bill to be intituled Children's Law Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed the same with amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the ninth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Second.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, wrong order number. I move second by the Honourable Minister of Health that the seventh order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 7, Appropriation Act, Capital Expenditures, 2021, Bill number 76, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Minister of Health that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 76, Appropriation Act, Capital Expenditures, 2021, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House taking into consideration the bill to be intituled Appropriation Act Capital Expenditures 2021. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Gordon McFadgen, Assistant Secretary to Treasury Board.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to commence with a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Sure, very brief. It is actually the approval for capital expenditures for 2021.
Thank you. Honourable members, are there any questions on this bill? Shall the bill carry? Shall the schedule carry?
I move the title.
Appropriation Act Capital Expenditures 2021. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
May it please your honour, we, Her Majesty's dutiful and loyal servants, the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island, towards appropriating the several supplies raised for the exigencies of Her Majesty's government and for other purposes hereinafter mentioned, do humbly beseech that it be enacted. Be it therefore enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. 1. There may be paid out of the operating fund a sum not exceeding in the whole $195,853,500 to be applied toward defraying the several capital charges and expenses of the public service not otherwise provided for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022 as set forth in the schedule. 2. There may be paid out of the operating fund toward defraying the several capital charges and expenses of the public service not otherwise provided for from the expiration of the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022 until the passing of capital estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023, a sum sufficient based on the capital estimates for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendments.
Shall it carry? Carry. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House having under consideration a bill to be intituled Appropriation Act Capital Expenditures 2021, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry.
Carry.
Carry. Yeah.
Okay, honourable members, there's a request for a standing vote.
All. Oh yes, Sergeant Arms, ring the bell. Always do.
Ready for the vote?
Mr. Speaker, the opposition is ready for the vote.
Mr. Speaker, third party is ready for the vote.
Honourable members, those voting against, please rise.
The honourable member from Cornwall Meadowbank. and the honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness. Oh, I'm sorry. And the honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
All those voting in favor, please rise.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow, the honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, and the deputy speaker, the honourable minister of Fisheries and Communities, the honourable minister of Finance, the honourable minister of Health and Wellness, honourable premier, the honourable minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, the honourable minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the honourable minister of Agriculture, Land, and the minister of Justice and Public Safety, the honourable minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, the honourable minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the honourable minister of Social Development and Housing, the honourable member from Montague-Kilmuir, the honourable leader of the Third Party, the honourable member from Morel-Donagh, the honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the honourable member from Summerside South Drive, the honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, and the honourable member from Summerside Wilmot.
Honourable members, bill has passed. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Health, that the fifth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Order number 5, Medical Society Act, Bill number 77, ordered for third reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health, that the said bill be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 77, Medical Society Act, read a third time.
That the bill do now pass. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Health, that the said bill do now pass.
With or without? Okay. Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to, with or without, whatever the case may be, amended, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do not pass. All those in favour say yea.
Yea.
Contrary, nay. Honourable members, bill has passed. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health, that the sixth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 6, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, Bill number 78, ordered for third reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health, that the said bill be read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 78, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, read a third time.
Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health, that the said bill do now pass.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to, with or without, whatever the case may be, amended, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do now pass. All those in favor say yea.
Yay.
Contrary, nay. Honourable members, bill has passed. Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land Justice and Public Safety, that the 8th order of the day be now read.
Show it carry.
Carry.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice and Public Safety, that the said bill be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill 57, Children's Law Act, read a third time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Justice and Public Safety, that the said bill do now pass.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by Leader of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the Whole House, reported, agreed to, with amendment, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do now pass. All those in favour say yea. Yea. Contrary, nay. Honourable members, bill is passed. Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent from this House that the 7th order of the day be now read a third time.
Honourable members, does she have consent?
Bill number 76, Appropriation Act Capital Expenditures 2021, read a third time.
Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that the said bill do now pass.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have debated this budget in the House for over a week, and to almost all of our questions, the Minister of Finance has indicated she doesn't have the information to the answer. And even when they are present during debate, the ministers who would have the information refuse time and time again to offer that information and offer support for the budget. Repeatedly, the Minister of Finance told us, we'll have to get back to you on that. We are still waiting for many of those answers. With the lack of information being provided by government, the reluctance to answer our questions, and the inability to explain to Islanders why pavement should be prioritized over things such as healthcare, mental health, and housing, I feel I cannot in good conscience provide informed and confident vote on this budget. For me, the capital estimates is not a procedural rubber stamp on government spending. It is an opportunity for government to rally support for the future direction of the province by laying out a clear plan. Government is missing a great opportunity to be transparent and upfront with Islanders. This is not a show we were putting on. This is a job, and one I take seriously. I cannot indicate support or opposition to a budget that is lacking details or substance. Government refuses to provide answers and asks us to just trust them. We cannot do that. We trusted them last year to invest in housing and mental health. 18 months later, we are learning that government is underspending in these critical crisis areas. Islanders put their faith in this government when they said shovels in the ground on day one for a new mental health hospital. Now we discover mental health seems to have fallen as a priority, with government's decision to not do any significant work on a new mental health hospital for at least another 3 years. This government has consistently refused opportunities to justify its budget. It is refusing to show Islanders how and why it is making decisions to not put priority or emphasis on the major health and housing crises facing Islanders. Even more importantly, though, I believe, is that this government has put no effort or thought into asking themselves what information would one actually need to have to understand the why behind these budget decisions. Why is it that some things have been prioritized and at what cost? What will be pushed aside or delayed, and who made these decisions? Mr. Speaker, it has been like pulling teeth, no offense to any former dentists in the room, to get information. And the 700-page operational and master planning document for mental health and addictions, it was submitted for approval in February 2020, but was only just approved last week, coincidentally, and then shared after we had passed the budget sections on health and health spending. I think that's very telling. To reiterate, the minister approved the master plan for mental health and addictions on November 24th, just 1 week after I came into this House and asked questions about why this plan has been delayed. Honestly, it feels like we had to walk government through what information is needed to make the arguments for why budget decisions have been made. And in the short time we have to debate this, essentially starting from scratch with information sharing, it's simply not possible to make an informed decision about this budget, particularly in the areas of healthcare and mental health spending. This government made changes to the consideration of the operating budget, where opposition parties now have access to greater line-by-line breakdowns of the estimates before debate even begins. This was commendable then, and it is commendable now. But it shows government is always able to make the choice to share information. I was disappointed by the same decision is not being made with the capital budget. Consideration of the estimates is important. We are called to carefully review and deliberate on the expenditure of hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars. This is not a responsibility that any of us should take lightly. Mr. Speaker, this is the government's budget. They are the ones with intimate knowledge of the capital projects they are proposing, and they are free to choose how much information they share with this House and the people we represent. In this case, I feel government has not been forthcoming enough with information, and I cannot vote yes to a budget and projects that lack adequate information and justification. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have never spent so much time deciding how I'm going to vote on anything before in my entire life. I take this extremely seriously. I've worked in the corporate world where I've gone through an entire strategic planning session, and then that strategic plan is what has led to a capital budget. And I've said this many times. I recognize I need to share with my constituents. I know that something that's very important to them is the high school, and we recognize the high school won't come for probably another 5 years, if it even comes in that time frame. But I'm happy that it's in the budget. And I'm happy to work with the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning and the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, as well with the town of Stratford, to try to really move that forward to do what we need to do for those high school kids, especially in the Charlottetown area of schools. My biggest challenge with this, though, is that connection from a strategic plan to a capital budget. And when you're approving $200 million worth of taxpayers' money, I need to know that there's a connection there, and that there's a connection for the next 5 years to take care of what islanders have truly said that they need. And that includes housing, it includes mental health and addictions, it needs better health care, and the list goes on. I mean, we heard the Santa Claus list earlier of the member from Cornwall Meadowbank. I have handled a lot of capital budgets and projects over the course of my career previous to being in here in government, and I've taken every single penny that I've spent very serious, and I've always reported back on what I was going to actually deliver with that money. And I would ask that the Minister of Finance be open to having conversations about how the capital budget is delivered in this House the next time we have that opportunity. And I think that that would be similar to what this government has done with the operational budget, because I applaud them for that. I applaud this government for what the information that they have brought forward during the operational budget. But I think that we have so much work to do when it comes to capital budget, because this is money that's going directly to our debt. And so it's for those reasons that I can't bring myself to voting against this budget, because I do know that there's some really good things in here, but without having that tie into how this is going to really impact Islanders going forward, I couldn't vote yes for it either. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak and letting me share that information. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just wanted to take just a quick minute to kind of share some thoughts. I did vote yes for the budget. And as the member in front of me mentioned, it was not an easy decision, and I was back and forth several times. And I would just like to get on the record my thought process on this. There's a lot of good things in this budget as we consider education, school builds, renovations. It's great for our children. And there's so much lacking in housing, mental health, and addictions, and that is where I struggled immensely. And there's so much hope for improvement through the gender-based analysis. And I know when you say that word, it's kind of hard to understand what that means, perhaps. And it means a lot to the women and children in this province. And when we know that when women do well, everyone does well. So there's great hope there. Overall, I'm disappointed, but I am hopeful and I'm cautiously optimistic. A gender-based analysis lens has never been conducted on anything before, and now we know moving forward that is something that's going to be applied to the next budget, and that's very exciting. We'd be one of the very few jurisdictions who do that, and it shows what leaders we are as a province. That is something that opposition has worked hard for. And I thank you for that. The 2 new school builds, which will be net zero, 18 new electric school buses being purchased. Those were direct requests from the official opposition we advocated for, and they're there. We asked a lot of questions during this budget. We had a lot of questions, and sometimes those answers were brought back and sometimes they weren't. And this is an improvement. It's a first step towards transparency, which is hugely important. And so, as mentioned before, I'm confident that things, will improve as we go on. And I reaffirm my commitment as official opposition to really work hard with government, to hold government to account. And as I mentioned, I am optimistic that good things will come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has made very impressive net zero promises. As promises go, they may well be leading in Canada and the world. However, the actual efforts to reach that goal are totally insignificant, in my opinion. They fall short by a factor of 100. We need to do 100 times as much to reach the goal set. It's easy to see when we look at cars. We have over 50,000 of them. To reach net zero goal in 10 years, we need to get not 50 electric vehicles per year like we do now. We need 500 or 10 times more isn't even enough. We need 100 times more, or 5,000 a year. Similarly with buildings. Aside from requiring all new buildings to be net zero now, not later, we also have to start upgrading our more than 50,000 existing buildings and need to do so at a rate of 5,000 per year. Aside from that issue, as has been mentioned before, the method used for budget approval is totally unacceptable to me. So I can't vote yes to this budget. Neither can I vote no, as I have no desire to trigger a non-confidence vote. So I will abstain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's lovely to have an opportunity to give some context to the vote that I just cast on this debate, on this budget, rather. The debate on the budget has been, shall I say, trying. The official opposition has been trying to get details behind every single budget line, and some of those budget lines, of course, run to tens of millions of dollars. We have been trying to get a place where we can feel very confident and sure that what we're actually voting for, what it is, and when we decide to come to a yay or nay on the Appropriation Act. We have been trying to make sense of all this massive sea of numbers that we've been swimming in for the last little bit, going both backwards and forwards, and trying to figure out what government's priorities truly are. I have been trying to make up my mind about whether this budget deserves to be supported or not. And meanwhile, the debate has been mostly just trying. We continue to get critical supporting information delivered, and generally pretty promptly, for which we're grateful. But that information often spawns further questions and unanswered concerns. Now, let me be absolutely clear, like I believe most islanders, probably all islanders, the official opposition does not want an election. We are not going to make government fall over this budget. And while we admittedly have some major reservations, and you've heard that from some of my colleagues already, notably the utter failure to address critical issues like housing and mental health, there are some positive elements in here as well, of course, such as the commitment to net zero that my honourable colleague just spoke about. But even with the example of net zero, there is very little detail or actual financial commitments to turn those words into action. Unfortunately, we already have many examples of this government's actions not meeting its words. With the new mental health hospital, we went from shovels in the ground on day one during the campaign to maybe shovels in the ground maybe a few years later. And this is one of the areas where this government has really disappointed me the most. I thought they were committed to acting on the mental health crisis where the previous government absolutely did not. But so far, we've seen more of the dithering and lack of action that typified the previous administration. So will it be the same with net zero? I don't know. We've seen nothing in this sitting to suggest that it will be any different.
Yeah, zero questions.
In many areas of this budget, government was unable or simply unwilling to give specifics, which makes it very difficult for us on this side of the House who have critical responsibilities to review and scrutinise government, to make fully informed decisions about these proposed expenditures. On this side of the House, we like to think that we take our job thoroughly and we take pride in the work that we do, and we try to really understand the decisions that we're making on behalf of islanders. And we don't appreciate being rushed in our work, and we don't appreciate not being able to deal with the entirety of the information that we need to make a fully informed decision. If indeed this is like pulling teeth, as my honourable colleague said, then the government has been a particularly difficult and obstinate patient in this process. Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed, but I'm not ready to abandon all hope that this Premier will turn things around. While I may not be happy with either the content of some of this budget or the process surrounding its debate in this House, I still see great possibility in it. If this government really follows through on their promises, if they go above and beyond some of the better commitments in this budget, then islanders will indeed be well served. If we see net zero standards implemented beyond just 2 schools, if we see an acceleration of the new mental health hospital construction, if government not only fully spends its housing budget but increases it so that all islanders can live in dignity and security, then islanders will be well served. The Premier himself described himself just the other day as anything but the same old, and I can't disagree with that statement. But our Premier is not by himself government. And despite his personal commitment to do things differently, a commitment I can see and I hear every day clearly in the Premier's face and in his words and his personal assurance, I also see a government that seems to be slipping back into old habits, the same habits that islanders so clearly said in the last election they were done with. So, as with many members of my caucus, when it comes to deciding how to vote on this budget, I was torn. I see promise, but I'm also very wary that those promises may not be kept. I cannot, in good conscience, vote in favour of this budget, but I also cannot, in good conscience, vote against it. There are many bills or motions that pass through this House about which I feel less than 100% for or against. Very few that you feel absolutely certain on. Things are rarely that neatly delineated. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to make that choice. And in most cases, that involves falling on one side of the line or the other. In fact, I've never in this House abstained from a vote before. In this case, however, I have more to consider, as the failure of this budget could have triggered an election, something nobody in this House wanted, and not a single islander that I've spoken to. And bearing all that in mind and wanting to keep the faith, I'm really trying to keep the faith and believe in this government, I decided to abstain from the vote. Unlike Charlottetown Victoria Park, who concluded her remarks by saying, I am optimistic that good things will come, I feel the same way. And I can promise you that the official opposition will carry out our duty to ensure that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker, and I won't be very long, but I just want to make a couple of comments. I mean, this budget was an extensive budget, and yeah, there was things in this budget that we over here agreed with and things we didn't agree with. But when we vote on this budget, we're voting on this budget as a whole budget, and there was good things in this budget for my area. You know, there's going to be a new school down there, and those other good things in this budget. That being said, we are sent here to vote on this budget, as I said, whether we agree or disagree. And I take kind of, I'll use the word exception, it might be the wrong word. The leader of the official opposition talking about bringing down the government. He's only got 8 members over there. Like, you know, like where does this talk even come from? Like, you know, we are a third party over here of 5, and we have a say in here as well. So to talk about bringing the government down is, I just have an issue with that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
No. Mr. Speaker, we revert time to the call for the, sorry, on this. Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by the Minister, the Honourable Premier, that the said bill be read a third time. No. Do pass. Do now pass.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to a committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to, without amendment, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do now pass. All those in favour say yea. Honourable members, stand and vote as requested. Sergeant at Arms, you may ring the bell.
Decide how to vote. I didn't get enough paper this summer.
Mr. Speaker, government is ready for the vote.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition is ready for the vote.
Mr. Speaker, the third party is ready for the vote.
Honourable members, those voting against, please rise.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank. The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness. And the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Honourable members, those voting for, please rise.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Winslow, the Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities, the Honourable Minister of Finance, the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, the Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Honourable Minister of Justice and Public Safety, the Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, the Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing, the Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir, the Honourable Leader of the Third Party, the Honourable Member from Morel-Donagh, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, and the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot.
Honourable members, passed. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Call motion 103 be now called.
Unanimous consent? Unanimous consent?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek unanimous consent for motion 103 to be called.
Honourable members, does she have unanimous consent? Honourable member, you have unanimous consent.
Motion 103. The Honourable Member for Summerside South Drive moves, seconded by the Honourable Member for Mermaid Stratford, the following motion. Whereas government has already announced a goal for PEI to be net zero in energy by 2030, 10 years from now, and whereas farmers have some of the largest opportunities in Canada for generating solar power, and whereas generating their own power can ease the financial burden of electricity to farms, and whereas Maritime Electric estimates that removing large farms from the residential rate class and placing them in the small industrial rate class could result in a 10 to 25% increase in the power bills of those farms, and whereas government, through Efficiency PEI's solar electric rebate program, currently offers a much smaller rebate to farms than to residences, and whereas farms often have multiple meters that cannot be used together under the current net metering rules, therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to increase the size of incentives for farmers to install solar generation equipment on their farms. Therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to introduce an enhanced net metering program that would allow multiple meters to be used in a single net metering agreement. Therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to ensure that these incentives are designed with due regard to socio-economic equity.
I'll call on the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, government announced the goal to make PEI net zero by 2030. This is a good target, but it will also be challenging to achieve, and we'll need a broad and concerted effort to pull it off. Systemic change. We're going to need all hands on deck for this. Agriculture is one of our largest sources of emissions, and it may also be one of the most challenging to address. In this motion, I want to talk about the positives, on the huge potential that exists in our farming community to be a key player in our transition to a carbon-neutral economy. But first, I need to say a bit about the rate structures for electricity. I sat in an IRAC rate hearing last year where Maritime Electric put forth a proposal to phase out the second block of power, first raising it to from 2,000 to 5,000 kilowatt hours, then doing away with it altogether. Government stepped in as an intervener and supported that plan. I came in late as an intervener and proposed instead that rates be reversed to make the first block of power and therefore less expensive and therefore currently pay more than their fair The vast majority of people use only the first block of power and therefore currently pay more than their fair share for power. Reversing the rate structure so that the first block is less expensive would ease the burden on most island ratepayers. The reason that government stepped in during the rate hearing was that there was testimony from experts indicating that the rate should be changed immediately. Maritime Electric's plan was to do it over 2 years, with the first raise in rates on March 1st in 2021 to the 5,000 kilowatt hour first block. Government was in favor of this stepped approach instead of the immediate. As of March 2020, some experts called for it. The evidence that government gave supporting its position was that it had new amendments to the Renewable Energy Act that would allow farmers to take better advantage of net metering on farm renewables, and that there was a rebate coming out for solar electricity installations for farms. Time was needed for these changes to create uptake in the farms who may be affected by these proposed changes. Some of these farms use hundreds of thousands of kilowatt hours of inexpensive energy per month. Here we are with March 2021 just around the corner, the date that we were supposed to be rising the first block of power to address this, and we have no changes to the Renewable Energy Act and a solar rebate that no large farm can truly make use of. We need to change this and give our farmers the tools they need to adapt. Not doing so for this long has put them at great disadvantage. I would hope that as a result of this motion, we will see government provide the proper tools to farmers so they can effect meaningful change and be an important part of our climate change strategy, as we know they want to be. Our electricity rates need fixing. Our small businesses are paying the price. Our low-income islanders are paying more than their fair share. Our price signals encourage higher power use when it should be the other way around. You just have to look at the IRAC order to see it spelled out. Large farms need a path out, a real path with real action. This motion represents that. It is essentially urging government to actually do what it told farmers it would. Doing so doesn't just benefit farmers, it can benefit so much more by removing a barrier to getting fair rates for all islanders. Mr. Speaker, Maritime Electric estimated that removing large farms from the residential rate class and placing them in the small industrial rate class could result in a 10 to 25% increase in the power bills for large farms. This additional cost could easily be covered by reducing how much power these farms have to buy from the utilities in the first place. PEI has one of the best solar power regimes in the country, so there's a huge potential for farmers to generate the electricity they need. Unfortunately, government hasn't done a great job of supporting this. Efficiency PEI Solar Electric Rebate Program currently offers $1,000 per kilowatt installed, up to 40% of the cost for its residents. But farms can only get $350 per kilowatt. This is definitely a start, but there's big potential to support our farmers, not only in reducing emissions, but as an economic measure to reduce power bills, if government would adjust this incentive to suit the needs of our farms. Another policy that needs to change in order to get more renewable generation on island farms is around net metering. Under the current net metering rules, everything has to go through one meter, but many of our farms, especially our larger ones, have multiple meters, which makes it nearly impossible to set up net metering. We need to change the rules to allow multiple meters within a single net metering agreement. I know government was thinking about changing this policy last year, but apparently that didn't go anywhere. Hopefully the minister can clarify if government still supports this change and when he's going to move on it. Mr. Speaker, there's one other thing I want to address in this motion, and that is something that applies to decision-making across government. It's important that something that applies to it's important in all the policies that we develop that we consider who benefits from those policies, who is raised up and who is left behind. We want policies that make our society more equitable. It's not about treating everyone the same. It's about supporting those who need support. I believe that this motion encourages government to be the strong partner our farms need right now. No farmer I've spoken to yet, and there have been many, is comfortable knowing that their bottom line is getting a boost on the backs of our most vulnerable and our other small businesses. To be clear, and I don't mean this literally, let's pave the way for them to adapt like government committed to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be brief. Mr. Speaker, I've heard the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy say that he wants to change the entire way energy is here in PEI. I can't remember exactly the words. And that is exactly what I'd love to see here, because the status quo isn't working for everybody, and I think that it's all about being inclusive. But there is one thing that I'm always concerned about, and that is I feel like our farmers are always pinched on their bottom line. And so what I would love to see is that this type of solution, solar rebates going out to farmers, would be one way that we could look at addressing how the bottom line of farmers is not pinched, and knowing that how beneficial these incentives are this rate change structure is for vulnerable islanders and our seniors. I see that we have a solution that we can help everybody. And moving forward, I think if we're really going to do things differently change the way that we do energy here on PEI, I think that this is a really great step in the right direction, and I commend the honourable member for bringing this motion forward, and I look forward to discussing it, because I think everybody needs to be at the table when we discuss this one. And I've heard from farmers also that really want to move towards this, but the problem is one windmill feeding 1 meter doesn't work for them, because there are so many meters on the farms. Anyway, with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to adjourn debate. Thank you.
Adjourn debate?
Yeah.
Do you got a seconder or two?
The leader of official opposition.
Honourable members? Debate has been adjourned. Shall it carry?
Carry.
Shall it carry? carried.
It's in line with your whole session, you just want to talk. You don't want to hear anything else. Look, talk, 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 talk.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm humbly seeking unanimous consent to move to order number 14 of the day, and I move that with the Minister of Health and Wellness.
Honourable members, does the member have unanimous consent?
Granted.
Honourable member, you have unanimous consent.
Okay.
Order number 14, Winter Wellness Day Act, Bill number 108, ordered for third reading.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by the Minister of Wellness that the said bill now be read for a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 108, Winter Wellness Day Act, read a third time.
May I ask for a standing vote, Mr. Speaker? No? I move that, seconded by the Minister of Health and Wellness, that the said bill do now pass.
Shall it carry?
Standing vote?
Standing vote.
Huh? Oh, you do?
Honourable members, there's a standing vote. Sergeant at Arms, you may ring the bell.
Good catch. Yeah, no.
Oh, no, that's Henderson would do that.
For the vote?
Mr. Speaker, opposition is ready for the vote.
And Mr. Speaker, third party is ready for the vote.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported and agreed to without amendment, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do now pass. All those voting against the bill, please stand. All those voting for the bill, please stand.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Winslow, the Honourable Member from Tignish Plummer Road, the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities, the Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier, the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, the Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land and Justice and Public Safety, the Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing, the Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir, the Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank, the Honourable Leader of the Third Party, the Honourable Member of, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the Honourable Member from Morel Dona, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness, the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Brighton, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot, and the Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Honourable members, bill is passed unanimously. The honourable member from Montague, Kilmuir, and the government, Morel, Dona, and the government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Montague, Kilmuir, that the 19th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry? Honourable member, you need unanimous consent.
I don't think so. we're on time other than government. It's third reading.
Do you have unanimous consent?
Do I need it? Okay. I asked for
Bill
unanimous
number
consent.
Pardon me? Order number 17, an act to amend the United Church of Canada Act, Bill number 201, ordered for third reading.
The honourable member from Morel Donagh, Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the member from Montague-Kilmere, that the said bill be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 201, an act to amend the United Church of Canada Act, read a third time.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Montague for Kilmere, that the said bill do now pass.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by Leader of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to without amendment. Read a third time and is now moved that the bill do now pass. All those in favour say yea.
Yea.
Contrary? Nay. Honourable member, passed. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to advise the House here that this concludes the business of this government during the fall sitting of 2020.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Honourable members, I have been advised that the Honourable Lieutenant Governor will be arriving at the Honourable Coles George building shortly. I will now leave the chair and invite Her Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, to join us at the Chamber to receive the House and to grant royal assent to the various bills passed by the House. I will also request at this time all members please wear their masks for the remainder of the day. Thank you. Honourable members, I've also just received a message that's probably going to be 10 minutes before the Lieutenant Governor arrives, so we'll probably take a recess until we ring the bell. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor of Prince Edward Island, request permission to enter the chamber.
Granted.
Pardon me, Your Honor. Your Honor, the Legislative Assembly has passed certain bills during this, the first session of the 66th General Assembly, and now begs Your Honor's consideration and the grant of royal assent for the following bills. An Act to amend the Pharmacy Act, Bill Number 39. An Act to amend the Labor Mobility Act, Bill Number 40. An Act to amend the Labor Act, Bill Number 43. An Act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act, Bill Number 44. An Act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act, Bill Number 45. Forest Fire Protection Act, Bill Number 46. An Act to amend the Hospitals Act, Bill Number 48. An Act to amend the Highway Traffic Act, Number 5, Bill Number 52. An Act to amend the Highway Traffic Act, Number 6, Bill Number 53. Films Act Statutes Repeal Act, Bill Number 54. An Act to repeal the Foreign Resident Corporations Act, Bill Number 55. An Act to repeal the Charities Act, Bill Number 56. An Act to amend the Registry Act, Bill Number 60. An Act to amend the Sheriff's Act, Bill Number 62. An Act to amend the Land Protection Act, Number 3, Bill Number 64. An Act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act, Bill Number 65. An Act to amend the An Act to amend the Municipal Government Act, Bill Number 66. An Act to amend the Insurance Act, Bill Number 67. An Act to amend the Survival of Actions Act, Bill Number 68. An Act to amend the Financial Administration Act, Bill Number 69. An Act to amend the Regulated Health Professions Act, Number 2, Bill Number 70. An Act to amend the Education Act, Number 2, Bill Number 72. Health and Dental Services Cost Assistance Act, Bill Number 73. An Act to amend the Intimate Images Protection Act, Bill Number 74. Opioid Damages and Healthcare Cost Recovery Act, Bill Number 75. Down Syndrome Day Act, Bill Number 119. An Act to amend the Animal Health Act, Bill Number 120. An Act to amend the Animal Welfare Act, Bill Number 124. Legislative Assembly Act, Bill Number 125. Net Zero Carbon Act, Bill Number 127. An Act to amend the United Church of Canada Act, Bill Number 201. Children's Law Act, Bill 57. Medical Society Act, Bill 77. An Act to amend the Liquor Control Act, Bill Number 78. Winter Wellness Day Act, Bill Number 108.
In Her Majesty's name, I assent to these bills. Thank you.
May it please Your Honor, we, Her Majesty, loyal and dutiful subjects of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island, in a session assembled, approach Your Honor to close of our labors with sentiments of unified devotions and loyal to Her Majesty's person and government. We do humbly beg of Your Honor's acceptance of the following bills entitled the Appropriation Act Capital Expenditures, thus placing at the disposal of the Crown the means by which government can be made efficient for the service and welfare of the province.
Her Honor, the Honorable Lieutenant Governor, doth thank Her Majesty's loyal and dutiful subjects, accepts their benevolence, and assents to this bill in Her Majesty's name.
Please be seated. I wish to commend all honorable members for the conscientious manner in which you have conducted your deliberations to this point of the first session of the 66th General Assembly of Prince Edward Island. Je tiens à vous exprimer ma reconnaissance pour votre dévouement au bien-être des insulaires, surtout pendant cette année avec ces défis incomparables. On behalf of all islanders, I wish to express to all of you my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation for your leadership and care in guiding us and helping us to deal with the challenges of this global pandemic. At this time, I pray that until the Legislative Assembly again meets, each of you enjoy good health and prosperity, and that peace and freedom for all people shall be more nearly achieved. And I wish you the best Christmas and holiday season that you can possibly have, and I look forward to seeing you in a renewed new year. Thank you.
Honourable member from Morel, Donagh, and the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that this House adjourn and stand to the call of the Speaker.
Honourable members, just before I call the question, I'd like to thank all staff, not only in the Speaker's office, but staff on the first floor, second floor, third floor, and fourth floor. It's the staff that make the proceedings go along so smoothly. So, and it's always nice to recognise the ones that look after us best, and that is our staff. And secondly, I'd like to thank the pages. You know, through this difficult time, I know this is the first session we had pages since COVID in March, and through this difficult time, and they did a wonderful job. They had some limits they could do, so they were pretty good at what they did. And also, I'd like to thank the members. Members, you're probably one of the most beautiful bunch I've ever worked with. Covering up, yeah. But it was a great session. Everything went along smoothly. There was some great questions, excellent questions, and there was some great questions. Excellent questions. Answers. That's why they call it question period, not answer period. The saying goes. But there were some great answers also. And there was some great bills. There was a lot of bills passed. And there was a lot of questions on bills, a lot of great questions on bills. I've watched every one of them this session from in back. There was great motions on both sides, great debates on both sides. And just look at the work that was just announced. So it was great work. It was great working with you, and I just hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas through this different times of COVID. And just remember, this is take COVID as an advantage. We'll use it as history, and use it to our advantage, because we're the ones that are sitting in the house through COVID and getting everybody through it. And with that, I'll call the question. Shall it carry? Carried. Okay, honourable member. Staff will show over the holiday.